You know, when you walk into this massive, beautifully designed skyscraper, you never actually look at the steel girders hidden inside the walls, right? You just look at
Yeah.
the glass, the view, maybe the polished marble in the lobby.
Oh, absolutely. The aesthetic presentation, I mean, that commands all the attention. The surface level brilliance is what you see.
Right. But if an earthquake hits, suddenly nobody cares about the marble. You are very, very invested in the invisible architecture. You know, the stuff that actually keeps the roof over your head.
The structural foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, those underlying guardrails that basically keep the entire building from collapsing under, well, unexpected violent pressure.
Exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this, because whether you are a football team stepping onto the pitch for a World Cup knockout match, or a squad suddenly dealing with chaotic early injuries, or, I mean, even a creator sitting behind a microphone trying to structure a show, it all comes down to that invisible architecture.
It really does. It's universal.
Right. And for today's deep dive, for you listening, we are exploring this really fascinating intersection of sources. We've got detailed match reports from the July 2026 World Cup round of 32 clash between Colombia and Ghana, a historical dive into the World Cup's Fair Play Award, and, unexpectedly, a Spotify guide on how to write podcast scripts.
Which sounds like a crazy mix, I know.
It sounds totally random, but they all point to one unavoidable truth, which is you have to script for chaos.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that the Spotify guide actually provides the perfect framework for this whole concept. It explicitly defines a script not as this rigid, word-for-word cage where you map out every single breath. It calls it a set of guardrails.
A set of guardrails, right.
Exactly. A strong script keeps you focused on your ultimate destination while deliberately leaving room for spontaneity and improvisation. And when we look at the tactical blueprints brought to Kansas City by Carlos Corres for Ghana and Nestor Lorenzo for Colombia, I mean, they were essentially writing scripts for their teams.
And, man, the disparity in those blueprints, like those pregame scripts, it was massive. Just to give you the lay of the land here, this was the first ever recorded international meeting between these two sides.
Right. Literally zero historical data on how they match up.
Exactly. You have Colombia, ranked 11th in the world, coming into this tournament incredibly hot. Like in their last 6 matches, they had 4 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss. They were averaging 2.17 points per game, putting 10 goals in the back of the net and only allowing 5. I mean, they were operating like a machine.
Like a fully installed, well-rehearsed operating system. Every single player knew their lines perfectly.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Ghana is sitting way down at 65th in the world, struggling heavily. 1 win, 2 draws, 3 losses in their last 6, pulling just 0.83 points per game. But here is the critical detail that really defines their entire script.
The managerial timeline.
Yes. Ghana's manager, Carlos Corres, who, by the way, is at his 5th World Cup, so the man definitely knows tournament football, he was only hired in April. He had barely 3 months to fix a completely collapsing defense before stepping onto the biggest stage in the sport.
Which is, I mean, it's an impossible task. The Spotify source breaks down the core elements of a structural blueprint, right?
Yeah.
You have the intro, the segue, the main points, the outro, the call to action. In football, a manager is scripting the phases of play. Ghana's intended script was born out of sheer necessity. Quarros basically wanted a slow, physical, defensive game.
Yeah.
The technical term for it is a low block.
So for anyone listening who maybe doesn't spend their weekends analyzing tactical whiteboards, what does a low block actually look like physically?
Okay, so imagine taking all 11 Ghanaian players and compressing them into just the defensive third of the pitch. You create 2 tight horizontal lines, 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, and they move together side to side like a pendulum, just tracking the ball.
Just totally choking the space.
Exactly. The goal is to shrink the space. So the attacking team feels like the pitch is only 30 yards long. It frustrates the opponent, it forces them to overcommit, and then boom, you strike on the counterattack.
Right.
But here is the catch. A low block requires this instinctual understanding of spacing. The gap between the midfield and the defense has to stay at exactly 10 to 15 yards. If one player steps out of line to press the wrong trigger, a gap opens, and a team like Colombia will surgically exploit it.
So Queiroz trying to fix Ghana's defense and install that kind of muscle memory in just 3 months, that's like trying to write a detailed deep dive script while you're already standing on a live stage. It's almost impossible to build those guardrails in real time.
You are essentially trying to build the plane while it is already in a nosedive. And you contrast that with Colombia's script.
Yeah.
Lorenzo's system was the exact opposite. Open, fluid, dominating possession. His players didn't even have to think about where their teammates were. They just knew.
Which brings us to the reality of the match. Because you can have your script, your blueprint, all perfectly laid out in the locker room, the intro's written, but then you step onto the pitch in Kansas City, the whistle blows, and suddenly the earthquake hits.
The script just tears.
Completely. We are talking massive injuries right out of the gate that force both managers to just throw their carefully laid plans out the window. Colombia loses their main striker, John Cordoba, after a nasty clash of heads with Jerome Opoku.
Yeah, just brutal.
And almost simultaneously, Ghana loses Marvin Sanaya. He has to be replaced by Alidou Saidu in just the 13th minute.
And this right here is the ultimate test of the invisible architecture we were talking about. How does the structure absorb the shock when your main point is suddenly erased from the outline?
Right. How do you recover?
Well, for Colombia, the adaptation was immediate. They bring on Luis Suarez.
And just to clarify for you listening, this is the Luis Suarez who plays for Sporting. This is not the ghost of the 2010 Uruguay handball that haunts Ghana's nightmares.
I mean, can you imagine?
Though, I gotta say, the irony of a guy named Luis Suarez coming off the bench against Ghana, just a day after the 16th anniversary of that infamous 2010 quarterfinal, is almost too thick for a Hollywood movie.
It really is. The psychological weight of that substitution definitely rippled through the stadium. But if we focus purely on the mechanics of the game, Suarez comes on completely cold. He hasn't had time to get into the flow of the match at all.
Right, he hasn't even broken a sweat yet.
Exactly. Yet, because Colombia's structural guardrails are so robust, he instantly understands his role. Literally within a minute of stepping onto the pitch, in the 14th minute, he executes this beautiful cross from the right side of the box, finding John Arias, who slots it home for what turns out to be the only goal of the game.
1 minute. I mean, he comes on, knows exactly where Arias is going to be without even having to think about it, and it's 1-0.
Muscle memory.
Yes. Now, let's look at the other side of the pitch. Because Queiroz admitted after the match that the moment Sanaya went off, Ghana entirely lost their organization and discipline. Like, the early goal meant Ghana couldn't just sit deep in that script anymore.
Yeah, that early goal forced them to improvise.
Yeah.
And because they hadn't had the time to build a solid structural foundation under Queiroz, their improvisation was frantic. They simply didn't have a backup script for going behind so early.
But wait, let me push back on the narrative of Ghana's collapse just a little bit here. Did Ghana really just fall apart because of one injury and they panicked, or was Colombia simply operating like a well-oiled machine? Like, it feels a little reductive to just say Ghana lost their heads.
No, that's a really valid pushback. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the match data heavily supports your skepticism. Colombia's execution was absolutely suffocating. They finished the game with a staggering 91% pass completion rate.
Wow. 91% across a full knockout match is wild.
It is entirely clinical. And what that means mechanically is that Colombia used possession as a defensive weapon. Ghana's entire counterattacking threat relies on the opponent making careless mistakes in dangerous areas. They basically need you to drop the ball so they can run with it.
Right, they need the chaos.
Exactly. And Colombia simply refused to turn the ball over. Lorenzo's guardrails meant every Colombian player knew exactly what angle to provide for a pass. They starved the opponent of the chaos they needed. Colombia's structure survived the early injury because their system provided constant solutions, while Ghana's structure shattered because Colombia never allowed them a single moment of oxygen to reset.
Okay, so if the team's tactical system is the main structure of the script, the players themselves are the ones actually delivering the lines, right? And a strong structure allows individual performers to shine without having to constantly carry the whole burden of the show.
Spot on. In any production, the overarching structure is designed to highlight standout moments. The Spotify guide actually advises creators to script natural segues that allow for dramatic shifts in tone and emphasis. And we saw players acting as those exact dynamic elements on the pitch.
Totally. Look at the goal scorer, John Arias. This is a guy who had a really, really rough patch, like a disastrous 6 months at Wolves where nothing was clicking. But he bounces back, goes to Palmeiras in Brazil, refines his game, and then steps up on the world stage to deliver the most crucial moment of the match.
It speaks to his personal resilience, for sure, but also to an environment that mathematically increases his chances of success. Lorenzo's system puts Arias in positions where he is statistically likely to score.
Yeah, it sets him up to win.
And then you look at Luis Diaz, the FC Bayern forward, who's named man of the match.
Oh man, Diaz was an absolute nightmare for the Ghanaian defense. He was this tireless, relentless driving force. He actually had a goal ruled out for being just a fraction offside. He was constantly pressing the back line, and he essentially just ran himself into the ground before finally being subbed out for Jemontin Campaz in the 90th minute.
Right, but then On the other side of the ledger, you saw the glaring mechanical absence of individual brilliance for Ghana. They sorely missed Mohamed Kudus, the Tottenham playmaker.
Oh, massively.
Without his creativity acting as a sort of pressure release valve in the midfield, Ghana couldn't transition the ball from defense to attack. And the result? They failed to register a single shot on target. 0 out of 8 attempts.
0 shots on target when your tournament life is on the line. That is a brutal statistic. But despite that offensive vacuum, Ghana was kept in this game until the very last second by one man putting on an absolute clinic. Their goalkeeper, Lawrence Atiziki.
Yeah, he was basically a one-man structural reinforcement. I mean, Colombia had 20 shots total, 60% possession, and they were constantly probing the penalty area. Atizigi made 7 high-quality saves.
7?
He was denying point-blank headers. It was incredible.
To bring this back to our podcasting sources, because here's where it gets really interesting for you listening, the Spotify guide talks about annotating your script, right? Leaving notes for dramatic pauses or emphasis. Diaz and Atizigi were basically the annotations on this match's script.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Atizigi provided the dramatic pauses by saving all those shots, and Diaz provided the heavy emphasis by just constantly attacking.
And ultimately, the walls still gave out for Ghana. When the final whistle blew, Carlos Queiroz was remarkably stoic about the reality of his team's structural failure. His, quote, post-match was simply, "What's next for me is to have a glass of water and relax, refresh for the next morning, and start to make other decisions."
Wow. A very measured, almost clinical response from a guy who knows the invisible architecture he tried to build in 3 months simply wasn't strong enough for an earthquake.
Yeah, he knew the foundation wasn't there.
So we've talked about the internal tactics of the teams. But what about the overarching rules that govern the entire system, the ultimate guardrails of the sport itself?
Right, because that tactical fouling we saw from Colombia, they actually committed 14 fouls to Ghana's 10 purely to break up the rhythm and stall momentum. That is exactly why the sport had to invent a universal language for discipline.
Yeah.
It provides a really fascinating look at how enforcing rules can sometimes lead to incredibly subjective and, frankly, bizarre outcomes.
Because, before 1970, managers could exploit the chaos of the game even further, right? Because referees physically could not communicate the guardrails to the players.
Exactly. The yellow and red card system we know today wasn't actually implemented until the 1970 World Cup. And the catalyst for that invention was the sheer, unadulterated chaos of the 1962 World Cup. Specifically, a match notoriously known as the Battle of Santiago between Italy and the host nation, Chile.
Calling it a match feels generous. From what I read, it was essentially a localized war on a grass pitch.
Oh, it was awful.
Players were throwing vicious hooks, kicking each other in the head, and armed police literally had to storm the field multiple times just to separate the teams. The English referee, Ken Aston, he ends up sending off 2 Italian players. But here was the fatal structural flaw in the sport at the time. Aston didn't speak Italian, he didn't speak Spanish, he couldn't effectively tell the players they were ejected.
Which just whipped the crowd and the teams into an even deeper state of confusion and violence. It was a complete communication vacuum. You cannot enforce the rules if the people breaking them don't understand you.
Right.
So a few years later, Ken Aston is driving home, stops at a traffic light, and has an absolute epiphany. Red means stop, yellow means caution.
Wow, it's a universal language. No translation needed.
It was a massive user interface update for the sport, if you want to think of it that way. You hold up a brightly colored piece of cardboard, and 80,000 people in the stadium, plus the 22 men on the pitch, know instantaneously what boundary was crossed and what the consequence is.
It's such an elegant, objective solution. But the implementation of the FairPlay Award, which grew alongside this whole disciplinary system, reveals this wild paradox. The award is ostensibly meant to recognize the cleanest, most sporting team at the tournament.
Which sounds completely straightforward if you just look at the objective data.
But the history of who actually wins this award completely defies logic. Let's look at Brazil. Historically, Brazil holds the record for the most red cards in World Cup history, with 11. They are definitely not shy about leaving a boot in.
Not at all.
Yet, they have won the FairPlay Award 4 separate times.
And the most glaring contradiction is the 1994 World Cup.
Oh, man. Yeah, during the 94 tournament, the Brazilian player Leonardo throws a deliberate, vicious elbow directly into the face of the American midfielder Tab Ramos. The impact is so severe it literally fractures Ramos's skull. Leonardo gets a straight red card. Brazil racks up 8 yellow cards across the rest of the tournament. And yet, at the end of the final, FIFA officials hand Brazil the Fair Play Award. How is that mechanically possible?
It perfectly highlights the flaw in subjective rule enforcement. The award is not purely objective. It isn't an automated spreadsheet tallying who received the fewest cards. It is subjectively judged by a panel of FIFA officials based on an abstract, highly malleable concept of sportsmanship,
Yeah.
positive attacking play, and general vibe.
It's all vibes. And it seems like that subjective judgment is heavily weighted by narrative momentum. Like, France won the award in 1998, which happened to be the year they hosted the tournament and won the whole thing.
Right.
But they had 3 red cards that year. Zinedine Zidane, Laurent Blanc, and Marcel Desailly all got sent off. That is a massive objective disciplinary failure.
Now contrast that narrative weighting with a team like Japan. Objectively speaking, looking purely at the data, they are the cleanest team in World Cup history. In their 25 matches up to the time of our source, they have received exactly 0 red cards and only 42 yellows.
Yes.
Their structural discipline is phenomenally consistent.
Yeah, their objective discipline is so solid that in 2018, they actually advanced out of their group over Senegal purely on a fair play tiebreaker, solely because they had accumulated fewer yellow cards.
Yet despite holding the best objective disciplinary record in the history of the competition, Japan is rarely the team holding the main fair play trophy at the end of the tournament. It raises this fascinating point about how systems of rules are applied. When human beings are the judges, the subjective narrative, who played the most entertaining, fluid football, who the host nation is, who ultimately lifted the trophy, that almost always overrides the cold, hard data of who actually followed the rules best.
This raises a brilliant point for you, the listener. Just like producing a show, the technical rules, like your episode timestamps being perfect or adding your call to action at the end, just like the Spotify guide dictates, those objective metrics absolutely matter. They are the steel girders we talked about. They keep the show from crashing. But subjective human emotion often dictates who actually gets the awards, right?
Exactly. You can meticulously follow every structural rule of the script, but if the human judges are captivated by a different style of storytelling, the objective data ceases to matter.
So bringing all these threads together, Colombia advances to the last 16. They are packing their bags for Vancouver to face Switzerland. And they are advancing not just because their players were better, but because their script, that invisible architecture laid down by Lorenzo, was robust enough to handle the chaos of losing their main striker in the 8th minute.
Meanwhile, Ghana's structure, which Queiroz was forced to hastily assemble, simply couldn't hold up. The guardrails snapped. Colombia had built a system that absorbed the earthquake, and Ghana hadn't.
It's the difference between hoping nothing goes wrong and having the structural integrity to survive when it does.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. We've seen that a script, whether as Carlos Queiroz's defensive block or a Spotify creator's podcast outline, is designed to prevent chaos. But considering the most memorable moments in both sports and media almost always come from spontaneous, chaotic deviations from the plan, are we actually just building these rigid structures so that breaking them feels that much more spectacular?
How? Were we just building the walls so we can feel the rush of tearing them down? That is an incredible thought to chew on. As you navigate your own week, think about where you place the guardrails in your own life and work. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.